Yeah, so I'm Lucianos. I work at Open Analytics, and I'm going to share to you my talk today about sharing data science artifacts across teams using Crane. So first, a bit more about Open Analytics. We're a consulting company based in Antwerp, data science company, and we primarily focus on methodology, consulting, scientific programming, application development, and the creation and deploying of data science platforms. What I'm going to talk about today is Crane, as I already shared. This is an open source application that tries to solve a certain problem, and this problem is sharing data. Sounds simple, but it's not simple when you want to share it in a specific crowd or a specific team. In this case, for example, if you want to share, apparently I'm not allowed to use a pointer. So if you want to share your data with a specific team in your company, then you don't want that anyone can see this, but only the people in your company, or the specific team in the company, or other company users. Or if you want to just share some reports with the public, well, you need some kind of program to do this. And to do this, you would need to implement some requirements. In this case, you would need authentication authorization, meaning you would need to know which user is which and what are they authorized to see. And lastly, the CRUD operations, so create, read, update, and read operations for your data you want to upload and share. So the solution we came up with is Crane. It's just a web server that connects the user to a storage location, which has some files which are either secured or not secured. And the users get identified using an OpenID provider, which then allows them to either see confidential or internal files or only see public files. How do you use Crane? Well, there are three prerequisites. In this case, you need Java 17 or later. You need an OpenID Connect server, but this is optional. And lastly, a configuration file for Crane. I'm going to focus on the configuration file for Crane. So the configuration file has two top-level configurations. So it's just a YAML file with an up-level configuration and Spring, as Crane is a Spring Boot application. I'm not going to talk too much about the Spring part, but if you want to share some files, well, the first option you need the first data you need to give to Crane is where is the data you want to share, so the storage location. If you have an OpenID Connect server, well, you need to configure some URIs, so where can Crane find the OpenID Connect server, or how does Crane know which are the groups of a user? This is all important for being able to configure some access control. And lastly, we have some extra options which I'm not mentioning here, but one example of these options would be audit logging. So if you are in a company which has high security requirements, you can use this option, for example, to log all the actions of users. So now to the important part. If you want to share data, you need to use the repositories property. Here we define the directories of your data. We tried to, in this configuration, to follow the file structure. So your storage repository is, in this case, TMP repository. And in there are some folders which all contain data. And at the left, you can see we have defined the same folders. This seems quite useless at the moment, but I've omitted some options. But under this data scientist folder, for example, you can define who can access this. So now let's get to the nitty and gritty of the access control. So say we are user Sam, for example, and we are part of Team 3 group, the DevOps group and the mathematicians group. Where do we have access at the moment? Well, In the data science this team, you could say we have access as we've defined that the read access for groups in this case. Everyone that has the group team 1, team 2, team 3, or team 4 has access to this data. And you have a lot more options like this, like for example, the user access in specific, where we allow, for example, specifically Sam to have access to the subfolder team 1. You have other options like network. For example, if you would like to allow only users from Mons University to access data, then you could add an IP address there so that only these people are allowed. We have some more complex expressions for this as well, which you can see here, an example. Well, that's quite advanced, I guess. It uses a spell expression from Java to define more complex access control. For example, in this case, if we only had this rule, only people that are both in Team 3 and DevOps team would have access to the Team 1 data folder. And some more simple options like the public option, which allows any user to see the files you've shared, and any authenticated user option, which allows any logged-in user to see your data. This might all seem quite abstract, but how does Crane work and look like? So in this case, the first example is of an unauthenticated user. They can only see the public repository, and in this public repository there are some files. In this case, I added the Crane documentation just to showcase that you can just open a HTML file and it all works just like this presentation, actually. One thing I would like to notice here is that there is Crane also provides upload capabilities. So in this case, the unauthenticated user doesn't have write access and thus cannot see anything related to upload, which will be different when we see, oops, excuse me. When we look at the example of Sam, for example, so when Sam wants to log in, we have configured here a Keycloak instance to as an OpenID Connect server. Here, this is more repositories. You can, for example, access the data scientist repository where I've put some CSVs, one of which I downloaded. It opens. You can browse it. And then if you go to the public repository, in this case, Sam does have access to write. He can upload a file. In this case, he uploads the configuration we used for this Crane deployment. He'll open it. And if I go a bit further in the video, you'll see that the reason he was able to upload is because, not as in the presentation, but there was an extra access added for Sam to be able to write into the public repository. Not only do we have a UI, but we also have an API. So if you want to use, for example, R code to navigate Crane, you could use HTTR2. And it will just return a JSON response. And in this case, for example, it has directories in the data and also the status of the response. You can also upload using the API. Yeah, this was all quite simple as I'm not an R user and I was able to do this in like 6 lines of code. So it was quite nice. There are a lot more features which I'm not able to explain in the 15 minutes I have got. So, for example, you can define alternative behavior if you get an error at screen. So what that means, for example, we are using this for one of our applications, which serves packages called RDepo. And if a file is not found in Crane, for example, you want to install an internal package for your R, but the package is not in Crane, then you can configure it to actually search somewhere else. It's quite handy because then you can redirect to CRAN or to, in case of Python, PyPy, and so forth. The example I showed you was using local storage, but you can also use S3 as a cloud storage instead of local storage. If you are in a really high security setting, you could also use a second layer of access control using POSIX. And this then uses both a configuration access control, but also POSIX. And the UI I showed you is just a template, so you can customize this fully. It's implementing time leaf. You can specify a specific storage location per repository. The audit logging I already mentioned shortly, but it's just a security feature. And you can also configure Crane to not require an OpenID Connect server by specifying that you will only share public files, so then no authentication is needed and thus no OpenID Connect server is needed. There are many more features we provide. You can have a look further in the Crane documentation itself. And I think that's about it. If you have any questions, let me know.